So I invite you to settle into your body and notice what parts of you are arriving into this space. How's your body talking to you? How are you feeling? What thoughts are you observing? Last week, I was in a 3-day training in Washington, D.C., focused on Jewish experiences and combating anti-Semitism on campus. One of the workshops we were in was talking about creating a life map. So a life map is basically thinking of moments in your life that have shaped your moral and justice framework. So we had to do that in 5 minutes. And so I've taken some more time to think about what are moments in my life that have really defined me. Here are a few. The first 18 years of my life, I was raised by my parents and extended family, all Haitian immigrants, each with their own immigration story, which I actually only learned this summer from my father. I grew up primarily in Brooklyn, New York, and then we moved to central New Jersey, actually the very white central New Jersey at that time. And my family was largely apolitical. We focused on celebrating Haitian culture, but there was really a focus on assimilation. It was ingrained in me pretty early on to keep my head down, achieve academically. I remember hearing a lot of, you have to work twice as hard, and don't make any waves. We attended a Catholic church, and as a teenager, I often felt like I didn't really fit in any space, whether it was predominantly white space, predominantly African-American space, or predominantly Haitian space. I always had to hide parts of myself to assimilate. I didn't realize back then that I was code switching into these different spaces. I went to my first UU church in Indiana in 2003 and felt like it wasn't a good fit. I joined my UU congregation in 2006 after hearing a sermon on marriage equality and another one on honoring All Souls Day. I was really drawn to our interconnectedness, the inherent worth of dignity of everyone, pluralism. And then in 2007, I was pregnant with our first child. And I was freaking out a little bit about what it would mean to bring into the world a Black biracial kid, a world full of racism. But in 2007, we weren't talking about racism. We were really in a colorblindness time period. And I remember inviting friends and family to come watch The Color of Fear. And I remember being disappointed that not as many people showed up as I would have liked. Then I got busy with motherhood and working, and in 2016, my UU church reactivated their racial justice ministry, and I was so hooked. I went into a deep dive, and if you know me well enough, things that become hobbies eventually become things I do for work. And I got really connected to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I really appreciated the really hard conversations my UU church had over those next couple of years. And we were one of the first UU churches to adopt the 8th principle. And that made me so proud. Fast forward a couple more years and we're in 2020. We're in the pandemic. There's the racial reckoning. Black Lives Matter movement is all over the news. And I ended up leading anti-racism workshops multiple times a week for the next 3 years. And there's something about doing that that changes something fundamental in you. And then last year, I fell in love with this book, Hospicing Modernity. I love the idea of using hospice as a verb. How do you, with care, bring something to an end with dignity? I also found myself going to a lot of teach-ins, learning about Palestine, trying to understand the level of charge and polarization. And then I remember at the end of last year, I gave a talk to 900 therapists and centered colonialism and Palestinian liberation. And the amount of backlash I got after that was more than I had expected. So what's on your life map? What parts of you are turning towards justice work and collective liberation, and which parts of you are throwing in the towel, collapsing into despair or avoidance, or throwing a tantrum? We are all living in modernity. Modernity came out of the Industrial Revolution, and there have been many wonderful things about modernity. There's all the progress and the technology, all the modern conveniences, and a lot of stress and unease and a loss of humanity and community for many of us. People are more anxious. There's more hoarding of resources. We've lost our natural rhythm with the environment. And of course, our planet is declining and decaying. The disparity between the haves and the have-nots continues to increase, and the illusion of the American dream becomes more apparent. I often think of modernity as a shortcut to talk about interlocking systems of oppression. Things like white settler colonialism, patriarchy, racial capitalism, imperialism, carceral system. And I often find myself thinking, can we reform our existing systems, or do they need to be abolished? I actually think we need to do both. I think of my offering today as 2 loops of liberation. One loop, if you think of like an arc going this way, is what do we need to hospice? What do we need to unlearn? What do we need to divest? What do we need to disrupt? And then the other loop is what do we need to grow? What do we need to reimagine? What do we need to build? What do we need to co-create? Part of what is required to hospice modernity is addressing the 6 C's within ourselves. Those are comfort, convenience, consumption, certainty, control, and coherence. I have a son who's turning 18 in a couple days, and he got his driver's license about a year ago. And there's this Mexican restaurant he loves in town, but he often will DoorDash. And I think it's this example of modernity, right? I love that he's shopping this local business, and yet DoorDash is convenient, right? He goes on his device, he presses a couple buttons, and poof, 45 minutes later, it's there. And I think it's just a great example of the beauty and convenience and the access it provides people, but also what does it take away? Liberation means different things to different people. Liberation for my parents was integration, right? Coming from Haiti, they wanted financial and government stability. They wanted the ability to provide for their kids, live in a nice home, go on vacation, send money back to family members. I think that's pretty typical for first-generation people. And I'm so grateful for all that they did and all the xenophobia and racism they endured. And yet, once in a while, my dad and I will have chats about racism. We're fundamentally different in so many ways. But there are moments where he will acknowledge that racism still exists. I remember over the summer, I went to visit him in North Carolina, and he picked me up from the airport. We tend to have deep conversations in the car, rides from the airport. And he said he was carrying his citizenship papers in his visor in case he gets stopped. And he's been a citizen for, I don't know, my entire life. And I think about that anxiety that so many people are carrying around. I remember when my mom passed away from cancer in 2017, he was driving me to the airport, and he said, I wonder if part of the reason she died was because of racism. And I thought, I thought it, but for him to say it out loud was interesting. And I feel that my relationship with my father is one of those ways where I can practice the skills I teach people about how do I show up with curiosity, even though there are so many things that we disagree about. So I think much of the work of anti-racism is internal work and external work. We have to balance all the reading and reflecting and podcasts we do with actually going out in the world and doing stuff. Recently, I was at a grocery store in my town early in the morning, and this older Black man came to talk to me when I was checking out, and he asked me if I was a doctor, and I said, yeah. I wondered why he was asking me this, and I said, but I'm not a medical doctor. And he says, oh, what kind of doctor? I say, a psychology doctor. And he says, it took him a lot of his life to figure out that the mind is the most important thing to freedom. And I thought, wow, this is so powerful, right? I wish more people understood that freedom starts in the mind. The Association of Black Psychologists was created in 1968 for the purpose of liberating Black minds. These Black psychologists walked out of the annual psychology conference that year and decided to start their own association because they felt that the mental health of Black people was different than the mental health that was being taught in graduate schools. And they did this at great risk to their careers. I'm so privileged to be learning from many of them who are still alive. I have found that liberation is not a linear path. It's full of paradoxes and contradictions. And it's required me to let go of comfort and safety. It's also filled with great joy, and the people I have met have been tremendous. I think of justice work as a spiritual practice, humanizing and loving humanity on the hard and painful days. I remember a friend asking me earlier this year, do you consider yourself a Malcolm or a Martin? Malcolm X or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? And I thought, that's a really tough question. Do you mean younger Malcolm, older Martin? Because I just felt that they had different approaches to liberation. And I felt like we need both of them. And the reality was that over time, they came closer to believing the same things. I've been learning a lot about Black Panthers. It gives me comfort. Those are the kinds of books that give me comfort. And I think about how they were vilified in the 1960s. They were on the FBI watch list. They were considered terrorists. And yet, they had a 10-point program. It focused on freedom, land, bread, housing, education, clothing, an end to police brutality. They offered breakfasts to kids. What is so awful about that? What is so scary about those Black bodies and the liberation that they sought for their people? The same liberation that was sought 100 years before, and the same liberation we seek now. And yet there are other groups of people who are also vilified now, fighting for their own liberation. And their allies are also being vilified and deported and arrested. In my book, I invite people to think of different liberation slogans. The three I offer, and I just invite you to notice how it lands for you. Black Lives Matter, Make America Great Again, Free Palestine. Likely you don't believe all three of them. And yet, how do we think of these as things to be curious about? What's behind those statements? What does it mean to different people? Who's being centered? Who's being dehumanized? One of the things I heard in a Palestine teach-in recently was that we have to move beyond moral outrage. It's a place to start, but we have to look at what are the things we can actually do. One of the things I've had to build this past year is, how do I build my anti-fragility? If I'm going to be a disruptor, I have to be okay with maybe people hating me, maybe people providing misinformation about me. When I really needed it at the end of last year, someone sent me this quote from Fix Injustice, Not Kids. If everybody likes you, you aren't doing anti-racism hard enough. It's important as equity leaders that we have to learn how to interpret blowback as evidence that we're building something real, doing something more than rearranging disparities. That's the philosophical end of it. The practical end of it, as we alluded to earlier, is that blowback can be exhausting. It can threaten your job security or even your physical safety. Let's be real. When we enact transformative equity, the blowback is coming. The question is not, will there be blowback? The questions are when and in what form and for how long and how viciously. So the questions I've had to ask myself this year is, how do I find safety inside of myself? How can my rage be sacred rather than destructive or annihilating? How can I stay true to my values? How do I surround myself with people who are more radical than I am, who are unapologetic in their beliefs? Being radical is relative. What I thought was radical 10 years ago is so different than what I think now. The veil has been lifted in many ways over the last couple of years. Liberation doesn't always feel good, and I've had to wrestle with the disillusionment that I've felt over this last couple of years, particularly the last year. And willingness to be with my pain. Saeed Jones says, your pain needs you. You know, I'm also a psychologist, so of course I think about how do we become friends with our emotions, the ones that don't feel so good, and how do we not get lost in despair, in hopelessness, in just unplugging because it's safer and more comfortable. So liberation starts in your mind. And for me, I think maybe liberation is the way I decide to parent. Maybe it's in letting go of the hustle culture. Maybe that means working less and being more gentle with myself and resting more. Maybe that means sitting with contradictions, moving away from the binary. Maybe that means breaking up with diet culture and loving my aging body that supports me in doing so many wonderful things. Maybe that means letting go of what I define as family. Maybe that means helping people in my circle of influence be a little braver. Maybe that is breaking up with capitalism, embracing minimalism, supporting small businesses. When I needed more resource this year, I changed the watch band on my watch to the Pan-African Unity flag, which is red, black, and green. Red is for the bloodshed and pain endured. Green is for the gifts and resources in the African diaspora, and black for the diversity of Blackness. It's a physical reminder to me that I am not alone on this journey. I have elders and ancestors and siblings across the globe, past, present, and future. I hope that you will find the resources that you need to support you in this time. Thank you for being on this journey with me. Ashe, ashe.